Hello and welcome. How quickly will the world have to act to stop millions of children starving and communities becoming displaced through the effects of climate change? Scientists are stressing how much of an impact global warming will have on the planet and the direct damage it will do to communities, especially in the developing world, if action isn't taken. The latest worrying signs come as leaders from around the world meet in Copenhagen this week at the United Nations Climate Change Conference. But as they search for agreement on the way forward, some of the poorest parts of the world are already living with the consequences of environmental damage. Increases in temperature are causing droughts and floods, with subsistence farmers in Africa and Asia among some of the hardest hit. Here are some of the startling findings put forward by researchers and scientists on what is happening to our planet. 25 million more children will go hungry by the middle of this century as farmers deal with changing weather patterns. The cost of basic foods such as wheat, rice and maize will rise dramatically as supply declines. Melting glaciers will cause sea levels to rise, submerging huge areas. For example, Bangladesh could lose up to 25% of its land in the next 20 years, displacing millions of people. So on today's show we ask, will concrete action be taken quickly enough to prevent the potentially devastating impact of climate change? You can join our conversation with your questions and comments by sending an SMS or an email and phoning into the show as well. Well, joining me to discuss this from New York is the United Nations top official on development issues, including climate change, Helen Clark, who is also former Prime Minister of New Zealand. Ms. Clark, it's good to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Now, it looks like things are already falling apart in Copenhagen with the leaked report that Denmark has proposed an agreement following secret talks with the US and UK. And that's according to the British newspaper The Guardian, which got hold of the leaked document. And apparently the secret deal would hand more power to the rich countries and reduce the UN's role. How do you respond to what's been coming out of Copenhagen, this potential secret deal, if it's true?
Well, firstly, Riz, it's all on in Copenhagen. You've got a huge crowd there. You've got leaders, I think 107 as of yesterday, jetting in from around the world for the last stage of the conference and hoping to put a political agreement together. It's all very tense. We've got leaked this, leaked that. But at the end of the day, at the UN Development Programme, we've always said this has to be a deal for development. If it's not a good deal for development, then there's not going to be an agreement. So that really does put a big onus on the countries of the developed world to come up with very strong emissions reduction targets and also the finance to help the poorer countries adapt and mitigate.
Now, you weren't optimistic in the first place. You were one of the first people to speak out, saying that it's very unlikely there could be a comprehensive agreement from this summit.
Yes, I felt some months ago it was unlikely that there would be I's dotted and T's crossed on a binding treaty at Copenhagen. And so what the aspiration for the summit now is a strong political agreement which can translate into a binding legal treaty at some point next year. But to get the binding political agreement, of course, we need the formula to hang together. And the formula is binding emissions reductions from the richer countries. Obviously, whatever action can be taken by developing countries, but they're not proposing to be bound in the agreement. And then there's the issue of coming up with the cash, which will help poor countries adapt to the climate change, which, as your preview showed, is already happening, and to find a low carbon energy and growth path going forward.
I'll get onto some of those in a moment, but let me ask you, what happens with this Danish text, as the leaked document's called? To what extent does it effectively cripple the role of the United Nations?
Well, it seems to us at the UN that a major new agreement, convention, treaty if you like, being negotiated under the auspices of the UN, really it would be a travesty if there wasn't a place for the UN in the architecture which follows it. And in the UN, we do a tremendous amount on climate and on development issues. My agency happens to link them. You've got the UN Environment Programme, which has a significant role. A lot of our agencies have work that impacts on climate. So we certainly need to be part of the structures and the architecture of the agreement going forward.
So when you have Denmark, the US and the UK talking, it effectively leaves out the voice of the developing world, which I know to a large degree you're a champion for.
Absolutely. Our mission is development. We know that climate change is one of the biggest challenges and obstacles to countries being able to sustainably develop. So we're seeing out of this agreement, if we can reach it here or post-Copenhagen, the possibility for a win-win, where developing countries are supported financially to adapt to climate change and also to find these cleaner ways of growth going forward, so that they won't cause the planet the same polluting problems as richer countries did on their path to development.
Of course, we have a lot of viewer questions on the show, and we had lots coming in for you, Ms. Clark, and I want to put one that came in from a viewer in Ottawa, in Canada, who wrote into Al Jazeera's Your Views page on the website saying, and this is from Sunny in Ottawa, in Canada, saying, "The weather patterns are changing and there are more tornadoes, typhoons, drought and flooding in various parts of the world. Anyone who misses these signs or fails to recognize them is in a state of delusion and denial." Now, of course, this gathering in Copenhagen has been touted as one of the last opportunities to make a difference on the issue of climate change. I mean, a serious turning point, potentially. Considering how things are going, is the world reacting too slowly? Is it not taking these issues seriously enough, as our viewer says?
Well, the idea was 2 years ago at Bali that Copenhagen would be the conference which signed off the legal treaty. That's not going to happen. But it is, I think, really critical that we make enough progress to see the legal treaty clearly achievable next year. So all minds need to be concentrated on that. The hour is very late, as your questioner says.
Now, it's interesting because we had a follow-up from New Zealand. You've answered this to some degree. Lance Cash in New Zealand said, "Do you think that the leaders of the world will be able to unify on having one decision coming out of this conference, or will distrust and alienation sever the chances of any successful outcome?" I know what you just said refers to the chance of something, concrete not being there, but what's the best compromise? What could come out of Copenhagen that might serve some purpose then?
Well, what we need is the developed countries to put ambitious enough emissions reduction targets on the table. We're close, but maybe some need to move a little bit yet. Then there really is the question of money, that it costs to do things which are not business as usual. We all know how to develop on business as usual with a heavy carbon fossil fuel footprint. That's not the way for development going forward, but developing countries are going to need cash to take that different route and put the investments into the clean technologies. As well, on adaptation, we need support now for our countries with their denuded forests, with the fast rising sea levels, with the droughts continually affecting food supply. There's a lot of effort needed to support countries to adapt. And at the end of the day, this is about whether people's homes survive in their current communities. It's about whether people can actually grow the food they need to eat.
Interestingly enough, the World Bank estimates ranging from $75 to $100 billion annually to accommodate a world that's 2 degrees warmer. Now, poorer nations, of course, going to be the hardest hit there. What chance is there of these resources being allocated? Where is the money going to come from?
Well, right now the focus is on the size of the short-term transition package, if you like, and that would be what's on the table at the moment is $10 billion over the next 3 years, with a new agreement kicking in after 2012. But obviously $10 billion over the next 3 years isn't going to do it. Yes, the World Bank has given those estimates. Prime Minister Gordon Brown months ago said he thought it was probably going to be $100 billion a year. Others have gone higher. So it's a substantial amount of money. But then we ask, what is the cost of not doing it? Remember Sir Nicholas Stern, who advised the British government, said that unmitigated climate change would bear an economic cost that was exceeding the cost of the 2 world wars in the 20th century. That's a huge amount. So it costs if we don't act. Yes, it will cost if we do, but not as much.
Now, it's interesting, the emissions trading system is at the center of climate change initiatives, and yet some scientists, including leading NASA scientist James Hansen, says it doesn't work, that it's just a way for rich countries to get out of taking real responsibility and to not taking steps to reduce emissions. I wonder how you regard the emissions trading system, whether it really serves any purpose.
Well, we came to the conclusion in my own country when I was Prime Minister that it was probably a fairer way of proceeding than just having an outright carbon tax. A cap and trade scheme does put a price on carbon, no question on that. But I think it also has incentives within it to reduce emissions, because you don't need to trade so much if you can get your emissions down. So I was certainly supportive of such schemes in my past, and I haven't seen a reason to change that view.
It's interesting, we had a view on the issue of different players in this whole equation. From our Your Views page, a note from a viewer in Mumbai in India, Axis, as he calls himself, wrote in saying, "The climate change issue is going to be a point of clash between the developed and developing world. The developed world wants to impose restrictions on the developing countries such as China and India, and they will simply not accept such restrictions." Now, doesn't China and some degree India don't they both have a greater voice on this issue now? Haven't they gained more relevance and more clout?
Oh yes, they certainly have, and both of them have made quite big plays in the last couple of weeks prior to these negotiations about reducing the intensity of emissions going forward, so that it would be significantly less than business as usual otherwise. So they are very, very powerful voices, and yes, my understanding, as per the question, is that they will not accept binding emissions reduction targets, but they both intend to move. And that's the critical thing. And I think when a great power like China, a great nation like India, puts its reputation on the line with an undertaking, it might not have legal force, but it's got moral force, I think they intend to meet it.
We have a caller on the line from the United Kingdom. Shaukat, good to have you on the phone. What would you like to ask?
Oh, hello, yes. As I am someone of Bangladeshi origin, which will be in brutal effect of climate change, if money is provided by rich countries to poorer countries, is it likely to be conditional and dictated to by Western capitals what to do and not to do? Thank you.
Thank you, Shaukat.
My understanding is that there would be a process through which applications for the funding would go. And obviously, you know, those who are putting up the money are going to want to know if it's been put up for adaptation, that it's spent that way. But I don't think that need be overly onerous. However, let me make the point that the clean development mechanism, which has existed to date under the existing climate agreements, has been quite hard for small and poor countries to access. And one of the big roles I see for United Nations Development Programme going forward is supporting those countries to actually be able to get the proposals up, which will qualify for the money and help them with their adaptation.
Well, interestingly enough, as you spoke, we saw pictures of Bangladesh there. Recently we did a show saying how that country in particular will be hard hit. Ms. Clark, we have more questions for you. I'm going to take a short break here though, but we will be back with our discussion on the impact of climate change and a look at some of the damage caused in the Pacific Islands in just a moment. Stay with us.